through wheelchair rugby at the Paralympics is what sport can do for those people with impairment, and importantly, what people with impairment can do with sport. One of the most important things we do as an organisation is provide a competitive framework where people can actually get to our own World Championship and the Paralympics. To have that, we need a strong competition programme, and I'm delighted to say that the competitions department or committee are very, very active. And recently they have produced a 3-year programme to bring a four-year programme into 3, and they've done a marvellous job at that. But one of the things that would be really good is if we could showcase our sport in competition in countries that currently don't play wheelchair rugby. And we'd be very happy if any of you wish to host wheelchair rugby competitions going forward. And on that note, I hand over to Shiri, our head of development, who will tell you all about the way we go about competition bidding and hosting. Thank you, Shiri.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you again, those of you that were tuned in last month. Whether you're fortunate or unfortunate to listen to me again this time round, I do apologise. Tim Johnson couldn't quite make it. He was trying his best to get here tonight. But you hopefully will get a chance to hear from the gold medal winning ex-international Kiwi wheelchair rugby player in December. Hopefully he'll be part of our athlete panel. So I have got his presentation. Most of it I'm familiar with, but please bear with me in some parts. For those of you that are tuning in for the first time, just a little bit of a background, I guess, as to my involvement with the sport. I've been involved with wheelchair rugby for over 20 years in a number of roles, mainly within Australia and New Zealand initially. I was lucky enough to be involved at the international level coaching for a few years, been managing sports psychologist, photographer, and the role that I absolutely love is developing the sport at all levels globally. So I've been in that role for the last 10 years and have really enjoyed my visits to Asia in that time. I feel incredibly privileged to have delivered clinics in places I never dreamed of visiting, and they've just been absolutely enlightening. So I can't wait for my next visit. We did actually hold wheelchair rugby at the Asia Para Games in 2014, and I'm very much looking forward to having that back, hopefully, when Japan hosts the next one. We tried very hard, as Sean knows, to get it to 2022, and we'll be trying even harder for Japan. So this hopefully is a pathway towards 2026 for the Asia Para Games, and I'm going to talk you through how to host a tournament, basically clubs in your own country, next door neighbouring countries, right through to bidding for world champs, even if you don't have a team within your country. So I'll just share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so we should be good to go. So as I said, unfortunately, Tim can't be with us, but I'm going to talk you through how to host a wheelchair rugby tournament. So what we're going to do is emphasise the fact that we are here to help. IWRF is here at any point, at any stage, from we'd like to start the sport to we're thinking of hosting our first ever local tournament with a couple of clubs in our region within our country, to we'd like to ask a neighbouring country to pop over, to hey, we're going to go and bid for a zonal event. So we'll list the emails and the people to contact, but we are absolutely here to help you in any way, including filling out bid documents, which we'll get to later on. We're going to talk through planning for the event, competition venue, making sure that accommodation and transport is accessible and appropriate, what officials you need for events, and they do differ depending on the level of event that you're looking at hosting, budgets and income, reasons for hosting, and as I said, bidding for championship level events as well. So first of all, ask us for help. The photos that I've attached here are indicative of two aspects of asking for help. The first one is a chair that made its way to our regional competition a few years ago that while not only being ineligible eligible was actually quite a dangerous chair to have. So it's about reaching out and saying, hey, we're in this situation, we'd love to enter a tournament, or we'd love to hold one, but we just need to know a little bit more about how to go about a few things. And the photo on the right is a fantastic tournament that we held with Thailand. And the woman there is a wonderful woman from Africa who knows how to ask for help in every area. And she came over in a governance position and ended up deciding that she'd quite like to learn how to ref. And so we've got one of our international referees on court with her, reffing the court.
Excuse me?
To teach her along the way. So Steve mentioned our competitions committee. Kathy Newman is our wonderful chairperson who resides in Canada, and her email is there as a contact at any point in time. And Tim, who has put this presentation together, lives just down the road from me in New Zealand, and he is available for any questions relating to Asia Oceania. He is your go-to for the competitions committee. We also have representatives in Europe and the Americas. And also I'm available at any point in time about anything to do with development. You can get me on the development@iwf.com email. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So what Tim wanted to get across was there's really a handful of things that you need to know for planning an event. 3 to 5 main things. If you're keeping it really simple, is the competition venue. And as you can see by this image, this was a development clinic that was held in Indonesia on an outdoor court. It was partially, basically, what you really need is a flat surface. So a competition venue, accommodation for people that need somewhere to stay that's accessible, food and water, transport to get people to and fro. A budget is always a good idea to start with. And volunteers. We cannot run our sport globally without volunteers. We have one part-time paid employee in our whole entire global organisation. The rest are volunteers, and we really need them to run a sport of this magnitude. So those are the 5 things to think about. You do need more as you go on to higher level competitions, but honestly, just having your first tournament, those are the main things you need to think about. So other things that you might like to consider. A cooling system and first aid. We've experienced a few tournaments in Asia, and I have to say it's not necessarily the coldest place I've been to. It's fairly warm in parts. The image on the right is one of another fellow Kiwi, an ex-international player who came over to conduct a clinic for us in Bangladesh. And the fans were churning out hot air, and he actually became quite debilitated with the heat. And so we were innovative, and we managed to get large blocks of ice, which we literally used as cooling packs for him. So a cooling system is important to consider at any level of tournament. And first aid. The photo below is a couple of our wonderful nurse paramedics from Thailand who sat throughout the 5 days of our regional competition. And I think may have been used once for a Band-Aid, but they were there just in case anything happened. So it is actually a mandate of IWF that we do need some form of medical assistance, medical officer on site. And as we go through the various competitions, that becomes more comprehensive. So it pays to start thinking about that from the very beginning. If you're looking at a development tournament, a lower level tournament, you can use local officials and volunteers, and the local organising committee is responsible for that. In saying that, IWF will again absolutely help you source and train those officials. However, you do not have to come to the IWF for a local tournament. You can use your local officials. As you move up through the tournaments, move to regional level and sanctioned tournaments, then you do need to use internationally certified IWRF officials. And the technical delegate, the IWF personnel, will handle that for you. They'll liaise with you as to the best way to source those officials, and they will get them to the tournament and run the officials themselves. Same with the competition format. The IWF will largely be responsible for the competition format at the lower level, always in conjunction with the local organising committee, regardless of the level of tournament. However, at the lower level, then the local organising committee has far more say in how they would like to run the competition, the actual game format, whether it's a round robin, whether you have semi-finals, finals, those kinds of things. That was what I mean by competition format. Again, IWF happy to help out. Presentation and ceremonies, they're something to consider. They're not necessarily needed, but they are always valued. And it's really nice to have the opportunity to thank all the volunteers that have made the event possible. So that's something to consider. The venue. Now, one thing that we've found over many years of organising competitions is that it pays to confirm the venues available for when you want. When we ask for countries to bid for competitions, we generally have a window of time that we'd like that competition held. And there's a lot of variables associated with the reasons why we make that decision. Generally, there's a lot of competitions outside of the COVID environment. There's a lot of competitions going on globally, and we don't have enough officials and classifiers. And also, teams want to go to more than one competition a year. So we state that this particular competition we'd like to hold in Asia between October the 1st and, November the 12th. Maybe it's a reasonably large gap. So when you're looking at bidding and you're thinking about your competition venue and your accommodation particularly, make sure that they are available. There's always lots of things going on, particularly in big cities. So best to have 2 dates in mind. And then when you bid, you can say, look, these are the dates that we can adequately cover this event. When you're looking at the competition venue, it's a really, really good idea, and we actively encourage this, to have someone who uses a wheelchair day to day to go with you, to make sure that it's accessible. There's a number of little things that those that are ambulant don't necessarily take into consideration. It's not just about ramps, it's about the width of doorways, it's about the heights of things that you may need to access. It's all sorts of things. So accessible at a competition venue, it's really important to consider the bathrooms, ramps, and if there aren't ramps, what can be put in. And again, while you're looking around a competition venue, it's pretty easy to just bump up or lift up someone who's in the chair up 3 or 4 steps. But when you have 60 athletes in chairs, it's not as easy and it's very time consuming. So you do need to look at ramps and access. Entries and exit points for wheelchair users, and obviously court access. And it sounds like that's something that you wouldn't have to think about, but there have been a number of venues that actually are inaccessible for wheelchairs. So this is 3 examples of different levels of competition. The top one, again, is showcasing Indonesia and our outdoor court that worked absolutely fantastically for what we needed. We had 7 countries involved. We had a small number of athletes. We were showcasing sport. We were running clinics, but we also managed to show what a game was like. We had a flat surface and it worked perfectly. The middle facility is a small gym. For those of you new to the sport, we play on a basketball court, and this is showing an area that where the game's played, but also the warm-up was there as well. So depending on the size of your facility also depends on the format, because you may have to allow time in between games for teams to warm up. And the bottom photo is an image from London 2012 Paralympics. So pretty much the pinnacle of what we would expect at that level of the sport. So again, spectator access, you've got lots of runoff, you've got lots of room around the court, you've got great access and accessibility. So what facilities do you need? Again, as stated, a flat surface and 4 tri-posts. So that's essentially 4 cones, 2 at either end of the court. As stated, we use a basketball court, but we have wheelchair rugby markings, and these can be marked out just using tape. So we have a key at either end, and that's 1.75 metres by 8 metres long, and that's where a try is scored. We also need space outside, alongside the court for the penalty box. So when you foul or do something naughty and get sent off for a short period of time, that's where you have to sit. And that's a small 1 metre by 1 metre area off to the middle of the side of the court. You also need a table and some chairs, 1 metre back from the sideline, at least 1 metre back, preferably 2, from the sideline for the classifiers to sit and observe. You're going to hear, if you are tuning in December, mid-December, we have a webinar on classification where we'll talk more about the eligibility of players, how players are classified. But one part of that is a team of 3 classifiers that sit at a table at the side of the court and observe the person in the chair playing and showcasing the skills of wheelchair rugby. A scoreboard is a really good idea, and at the very least, it could be a blackboard and someone writing the score up in chalk. It could be a flip chart, but as you move on, really an electronic scoreboard, such as those used in basketball and other events, is recommended. At least one, at least viewable by the majority of spectators. It's nice to have one at either end of the court. Because the game is played to a 40-second clock, you do need to time that. So when the ball is inbounded from one end, the offensive team have 40 seconds to score at the other end. So ideally at the large end, at the World Championship level, there would be 4 small clocks on each corner of the court showcasing the time, counting down. But again, at the development level, you don't necessarily need that. Best case scenario, you have someone calling out when there's 10 seconds to go. You do need an area for larger events, and that may still be a development level, but if you have 4 to 6 teams competing, you do need a preparation area. I mean, this is a team sport. At the very least, you're usually having 8 players, generally 12 players, and most of those team members, those athletes will have 2 chairs, a wheelchair rugby chair and a day chair, as well as a lot of wheels. So we do need equipment storage for large events. So accommodation, as stated, it's a really good idea if it's accessible. Not all rooms need to be accessible. Generally, we try and fit 2 wheelchair users in one room, and we can share bathrooms in terms of shower facilities between a team, but ideally a team generally likes to have access to 2 fully accessible bathrooms. So just going back to the beginning, when you're booking your competition venue, you also need to make sure your accommodation is available. It's pretty straightforward and simple, but it's actually something a lot of people miss. Yay, we can host this tournament. It's going to be fantastic. We've got this in place. But they kind of tend to forget that you do need to book the accommodation in advance, because not everyone's in town for wheelchair rugby. And make sure there's enough rooms for all athletes and officials. Again, IWRF can help with that. So if you are a wheelchair user to visit the hotel, same thing as with the competition venue. It's a good idea to see whether you can move the beds, whether you can remove bathroom doors. We've had many tournaments where we've taken off the doors to bathrooms and just put them back at the end, and whether you can adapt the shower facilities. Also look at what food options are available in the accommodation itself. When you have a larger event, and when I say larger, it doesn't necessarily mean a higher level, it just means a larger number of teams. Your competition format may be such that some teams fall slightly outside of the food preparation that's happening maybe on site, and so they will need to eat back at the accommodation. So can you access food prior to and after games? And what other facilities are available? What's local, nearby, that you may need to access? So transport. This is a photo from our wonderful clinic in Bangladesh a few years ago. We had a van for transport that was accessible. We could actually walk or push from the accommodation to the venue, which was wonderful. It was pretty hot, but it was wonderful. But one day we needed to load up the van and we didn't quite have enough room for one of the chairs. So it got loaded onto the local rickshaw, which did the job absolutely fine. But it's just an example of looking at what transport do you need? What's it going to be used for? So ideally, the best venues that we have held wheelchair rugby tournaments in at the higher level are those where the accommodation is literally at the venue or joined to the venue. So there's no need for transport between basically sleeping, eating and playing. So look at what's available. Look at the number of wheelchair users allowed per vehicle. There are a number of safety regulations these days. And I've been around long enough to know that while they may say 2 people in a van, and we know what we could get in a van, but it does pay to find out what you actually are allowed to have in the vehicle and whether you need to tie down the chairs, because that takes extra time. Tying down and untying chairs when you get to the venue adds time. And if you're on a particular clock for a competition format, you need to factor that in. What's the cost to hire those vehicles? That needs to come into your budget. And are you paying drivers as well? You do need to include airport transfers into your schedule. And again, that comes under logistics, where you're having some teams fly in. You're also needing to try and work around your shuttle systems. So you need to work out how much transport you need. Can you fit 2 teams into one bus, or do you need to do 4 runs with a van? So what's the transport system? Is it shuttles or is it pick up and drop off? So just an example of accessible vans and accessible buses that we've used regularly. And you'd be surprised the more you actually work within the wheelchair rugby field, how efficient we actually are at stacking wheelchairs safely into the back of buses. So again, it's a good idea to get the information and then talk to someone that's organised an event like this before. So moving on to officials and volunteers, what do you actually require for a tournament? So for a local game, there's 2 referees on court. So you need 2 referees, and you can get away with 1 scoreboard operator. Someone can work the arrow, you do the 40-second clock, and they can put the score up and press the buzzer for subs. 1 person can do all that. We generally have 4 people do that, but you can get away with it. 1 person at a local game. Again, it's a good idea to contact your national head officials, referees and classifiers with what you would like to do at your tournament, and then we can work backwards from there. We can look at what local officials do you have? What volunteers do you have in place? And have they done this before? Do they need any training? Can we build that in as part of the enticement to attend the tournament? When you're moving up to competitions at the regional, zonal, worlds level, there's a lot more involved. And the IWRF will step you through this. But generally, teams can bring along 1 referee each, which helps the load. We have 2 technical commissioners, which oversee the table. Your volunteers are largely used as table officials. And there can be 4 to 8, depending on the competition format and the number of teams involved. And as I said, those table officials are people that will work the 40-second clock. They'll be writing down the names of the athletes and who scored the goals and the numbers. There'll be 1 person putting up the timeouts and the score on the official score clock. And there'll be someone indicating possession of the arrow. Depending on the level of the tournament, there'll be 1 to 2 evaluators, because IWRF is constantly striving to be the best that we can be in all capacities. So we have evaluators that look at the work of our referees and debrief games afterwards, so we can make sure that we have the best people constantly learning and working on their own professional development, just like the coaches do for the athletes. And you're generally having classification at your tournaments, especially if you are developing the game, because it's about working out who is eligible if you want to move forward to the Paralympic version of the game. So 4 to 7 classifiers are needed as well. Then it's a case of thinking about what other volunteers do you require. Again, that comes down to transport, driving. Do you need people to help out with hospitality and food? Do you need to have security? What positions are there that you require volunteers to fill? And do you want development clinic sessions as well? And I'm going to be an advocate for that now, absolutely, and say I think it's the best thing if we can build them in, then we'll do our best, because we're constantly improving the sport within your country. And also developing officials and volunteers within wheelchair rugby is also developing them for other sports as well, depending on what events are held. There's a multi-sport event held, then a lot of these people have foundation skills that they can utilise in other sports. The budget. So what we've done here is there's 3 columns, and I'm highlighting each one as we go through. So the one that's highlighted in black at the moment is for, so you look at costs associated with administration. You may be lucky and have some fantastic volunteers that are willing to put a lot of the work in. You do need to account for administration. Catering, scoreboards, whether you have to hire technical scoreboards or not, what it's going to cost to actually mark the court and clean it afterwards. Officials, travel and accommodation, where are they coming from? When are they coming in? They generally need to come in 1 to 2 days before the games start, because they need to check the chairs and do a number of other things as well. If you have officials coming in from further away, you do need to give them time to actually breathe and maybe sleep a night before they start reffing a game. You need to look at the cost of transportation and accommodation, as we discussed, and also the hiring of the venue. So a regional tournament has the costs that we just talked about, as well as anti-doping, as well as drug testing. There's meeting costs and possible fees associated with site visits and a sanctioning fee. If you sanction a tournament, then IWF has certain stipulations on what is required for that. You can apply for world rankings if a tournament is sanctioned. There may be volunteer costs. Now, when you have volunteers, while they are donating their time, you also need to look after them. So providing them with some form of lunch and water is generally really appreciated. Are you utilising medals and presentations? Do you have a presentation ceremony that you would like to build? A program, insurance, including liability, and how are you disseminating the results or showcasing the results as the games go on? And then when we get to the championship, you need to add on to those things, costs surrounding communication, media, and promotion. Within venues, there's sound costs and extra lighting costs and signage. Hospitality, again, functions, a welcome, an opening ceremony, prize giving, all taking a step up. We're talking world championships, major zonal events and world championships at this level. Photographers are fantastic to have. Everyone wants to look back, and especially countries that develop the game, you really want, it's nice to be able to look back and see the players that were around 10 years before, sometimes longer. Look at how the game has changed and evolved and developed, or not, depending on how development has gone. Merchandise, tournament t-shirts always sell well, but they do cost to make in the beginning. So again, it's about building that into your budget. Live streaming the games is a really big thing now, and it can be costly. It depends on who you get in and who you know, but the quality is really important, and it's something that you absolutely need to build into your budget at this level. So talking a little bit about income, is there any money coming in? Because there seems to be a bit going out after those tables. There can be an entry fee for teams, particularly at the level 2, level 3, regionals and the championship levels. At the development level, the idea is to build the game, to create awareness, to get volunteers and athletes and future coaches, classifiers and officials interested and involved and wanting to be around wheelchair rugby. So the lower the costs, the better it is for everyone, but that needs to be covered through sponsorships or government funding. We have had some tournaments where teams have paid exceedingly low or minimal entry fees. And a lot of that has come through fantastic resourcing and fundraising by the local organising committee. But what it has done has really created a fantastic atmosphere for those teams that are all at the same level to all pitch in and help each other. A spoke about business sponsorship, going out there, and what do businesses get? What are they getting? And they can see their name on the side of the court, on the flyers, but they're also getting a piece of what is a fantastic global family. It's a sport that puts athletes at the very centre of what we do. So there's a lot of reasons for businesses to get involved and sponsor this sport. Local government support, look for various funding channels within your government. You can charge spectators and sell merchandise. And as sponsorship is approved, you can also lower the team entry fee. So while the entry fee can be set initially to cover costs, as your income starts coming in through sponsors and government support, then that entry fee can start lowering. So why would you host a championship event? To promote the sport locally. You do not have to have a team playing the game to host a championship event. You're creating social awareness. If you do have a team, then you've got the hometown advantage. You don't have to travel. Some teams may be at their training facility, so they've got a lot of advantages by having the tournament in their hometown. You can also train volunteers and officials that will be utilised within your home area and for your teams. There's also financial reasons for the income earned from hosting an event. We've had a large number of events that have actually made profits from hosting. So while it sounds like there's a lot of outgoings, there is the capability to actually have a turnover from an event and pour that money back into parasport or into your community. And it also creates a national athlete pathway. There's the opportunity for those players that may be considering the sport or on the sidelines, or those players that play at the domestic local level, to actually see the global wheelchair rugby community come together, to see the stars of the sport if you're hosting a top level championship event. And there's nothing like actually seeing those players in the flesh and having those conversations to create motivation and engagement with the sport. So bidding to host a tournament. So the first place to go is to check the IWF website and contact Tim or Kathy, as I mentioned before. If you go onto the IWRF website, you go to the competitions page. There is a tab entitled IWRF Bid Documents for Upcoming Competitions. And you can see what's available and the rough dates that we're looking at hosting those competitions. There is a lot of detail. There's absolutely no denying that there is detail, especially at the top end for a championship tournament. It may seem that there's still a lot of detail for hosting a regional event, but it has been simplified. And as stated, we are here to help. So please don't be put off by the documentation. When we actually go through it step by step, it's not necessarily overwhelming. It's just that there are quite a few pages. And when we're talking about a sanctioned championship event, the IWF wants to put on the best tournament that we can. And we want you to put on the best tournament that you can. So we're absolutely prepared to help you. There is a site visit involved for the regional, zonal, and world championship events, where generally the technical delegate from IWF will come to the country to visit and look at the venue and the accommodation to make sure that it's up to standard. Then you host the event and write up a report, and it's done. It's really not that difficult. If you get great people involved, if you create the enthusiasm for the sport and you manage to get a lot of fantastic volunteers on board, then it absolutely is the way to go, and it's so worthwhile looking back on it. There is a guide. It's just a 4-page guide, and I like to think that it's actually fairly easy to follow. I'm saying that because I wrote it a long time ago, but it's literally a step-by-step 4-page guide to organising your first rugby tournament. And so that's on the IWRF website. It's in the competitions page. And there is a PDF document called the Step Out document, Let's Host a Tournament. Again, we've put that on there, download it, print it off, have a read through, but we are still here to answer questions. Even after reading that, it may seem like there's a lot to do. Please get in touch with us and we can guide you through it. So 4 pages. Again, there's the competitions committee emails and a development email for anyone that wants to reach out. So just reiterating, there's that flat surface, minimal structure, minimal requirements, development tournament that can be built around development clinics. It can be a couple of games with a neighbouring country. It can be a tournament within your country. Don't think too hard about it. In the end, it's about people in chairs playing the sport on a flat surface. Then there's the regional events, which you're representing your country. You're playing in a small, maybe 4 to 6 team tournament, which does have IWF standards that need to be adhered to, but they are minimal. They're as minimal as we can make them, and they're as easy as we can make them to step through. And then at the very pinnacle, we have our zone and our world championship events, where all standards must be met. But again, we would love you to step up and say, hey, I want to tackle this. We're keen and we'll help you through that. So I love this image. This is of a young boy in Bangladesh who was just so enthusiastic to play wheelchair rugby. And he was all about keeping it simple. You know, let's get in a chair, give me a ball, I just want to play. So keep it simple. The 3 main things to remember are you need a venue, you need a place to play. It doesn't need to be big. If you are hosting a competition, generally it's over minimum of 2 days, generally 2 to 3 days at the lower end. And so you need somewhere to sleep that's accessible, food and water. And the shorter distance, the transport, the better. From the airport to the venue and the accommodation, and also between the accommodation and the venue. If there's any chance of actually walking or pushing there, then that's the way to go. But keep transport as short as you possibly can. And as Tim has said, it is about getting an athlete in a chair, grabbing a ball, grabbing 4 cones and having a flat surface to play on. That's really all you need. Able to facilitate that?
Yeah, I was out for a while. I don't know. I just kicked out from the classroom. Yes, I was a bad student. Okay, thank you, Dr. Sherry. Now, I think everyone knows how you can organize the programs and tournament of IWRF in your country. So now I'm wondering who will be the first bidder from us after this session. And we're looking forward to having the programs and training course and tournament in your country soon. Okay. Well, it's time for question and an answer. If anyone has any question, it's time, please.
Sean, there is one in the chat room from Raghav Mishra. We're not quite sure what the question is.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, because I lost every communication happened before. Yeah, the question was, ma'am, whose exercise to show the power increase. I think that meant to ask how they can increase power. What exercise will be helping to increase their shoulder power? I think that's the question.
Okay. So in terms of physiology and biomechanics, in terms of building up the shoulders for pushing the chair?
I think so.
Okay, that's quite an in-depth question that we really probably can't get into right now, because it comes down to the person in the chair and where their impairment is at, whether they're a low function, high functioning player. But what I will do is park that question and give it to our classification expert, who's going to be speaking on December the 10th. And she will be able to revisit that in a little bit more detail with some more time.
Okay, that makes sense. Anyone has question for Sherry and Steve regarding wheelchair rugby, anything. I just have one more question we received before the session started. The question from Wheelchair Rugby India is that I wanted to know about which company wheelchair is the best for wheelchair rugby games. I guess it was answered during the last session, right?
It was. It's the same answer this time. So there are a number of companies out there, and they are all good for different reasons. So what I would suggest is if you get into an environment where you're lucky enough to meet athletes who have chairs from different providers and they fit you, jump in and give them a go. See what suits you.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be totally inappropriate for the International Federation to be recommending one supplier.
Exactly.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, we got just one more question from chat window. If someone would offer to sponsor an event, well, it's not a question, but just Sherry, you can explain a little bit about any opportunity that probably our members can have any support program from your sponsors for organizing any program tournament in their country, if you have.
I'm actually going to pass that one over to Steve because I know he's been talking around that domain recently. So,
yeah, the issue, we have just engaged with a sports marketing organisation, and we will be rolling out sponsorship for IWRF. At the moment, we are, as I think Shuri explained earlier on, at the moment we have very few sponsors, and we need to build. However, what we do find is that in the locality, for example, for our World Championship, for our zonal championships, there are often local sponsors who are very interested in supporting wheelchair rugby. The important thing is that when the higher the level, when it comes to World Championship, when it comes to our International Wheelchair Rugby Cup, that the IWRF retains some rights to those competitions, whereas for localized competitions, we tend to allow the local organizing committee to take all the sponsorship because they need to pay for the tournament. And as Cherie has said, some of them are so good at obtaining that type of sponsorship that they do not lose any money. They don't have to invest any of their own money in delivering the sport. And that's what we would support that totally. And it's often the local sponsors, if you can attract them, that would actually be more beneficial to the sport in that country than having a global sponsor in that environment, because it's actually tailored, the sponsorship's tailored to that country.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, Shuri?
Absolutely. No, that was great. Thank you, Steve. I'm just going to put it out there that we are looking for someone to put their hand up to host our Asia regional competition at the end of 2021, beginning of 2022. So just putting that out there now, and I'm really looking forward to having a whole influx of bidders for that.
Yeah,
so am I.
Good. Yeah. And also, like Sherry said in the beginning of this session, that we also very looking forward to have wheelchair rugby back in our Asian Para Game, next Asian Para Game, and see how it will go. And yeah. Okay, any more questions from floor? Okay, I don't see any more questions from floor. So, thank you again, everyone, and Steve and Sherry, for your time and great presentation and your Well, I think we have one question from leg half, but I think this question is already answered by Sherry and Steve, which the question is which company of a wheelchair is the best for rugby sports. So you have already answered from Sherry. So, and yeah, there is one more question from Tarun Kumar. Is there any maximum team limits criteria for a competition or tournament?
If that's around the number of athletes in a team, then we have a limit of 12 athletes in a team. At the top end, at the Paralympic and world and zonal level, that's 11 males and 1 female make up the 12 members of our team, because we're a mixed sport. If you only have male players, then you're only allowed to bring 11 players at that level.
Sorry. Sherry, continue, please. Sorry, I said please continue.
Oh, sorry.
I thought you finished.
No, I thought you had something profound. No, so at the development level, there's 4 players that play on a court. 4 players play on a court regardless at all levels. But the team that generally travels to a tournament consists of 12 players, 11 of those are male and 1 female. You can have more, you can have 12 females. But at the top level, you can only have 12 players if at least 1 is female. I hope that answers the question.
And because of the different competitions, for example, in the World Games, which is for low point athletes, it will be 8 people in the team, 4 on the court. So in fact, it depends on the competition, as Cherie has explained. Top level 12, then for the different competitions, there will be a maximum allowed. And of course, the actual total number of athletes will depend upon the number of teams by your maximum number for each team.
Yes, and at the development level, depending on the costs associated and looking at your budget, you may also restrict the numbers per team. A team can end up being 20-something personnel. By the time you take into account 12 athletes plus a coach, assistant coach, a mechanic, a physio, carers, there's a large number of personnel. So that ends up being capped. But that's a discussion that can be had when we're actually looking at tournaments.
Right.
I think somebody on chat is just must be sponsored by our board, one of our ball sponsors. Someone's recommending the molten ball. Jerry.
Oh, excellent. We recommend the molten ball too, funnily enough.
Okay.
There was a question about NPC development or something. I saw that pop up.
Yeah, from Bhutan, NPC, we got one question. Does IWRF support developing NPCs with training and development of the sports? What are the process involved?
Yes, we do. The best thing would be to start off with an email saying where you're at with wheelchair rugby, whether you would like to initiate the sport or whether you have. The questions that would come back will be around, have you got players interested? Have you got a team training? Where are you at in terms of wheelchair rugby? What do you need and how can we go about that process? And while we're not in a position to directly support with finance, we're certainly in a position to help with resources, and these will be ongoing over the next couple of years in terms of coaching, education and practical resources we can hand out. In terms of advice and tips for actually getting started, there's a national governance startup document that's on our website. There's also the precursor to the 4-page step out document, which is a 4-page step up document, which is how to actually start the sport, how to develop the sport. So we have documents and resources. The short answer is yes, if you get in touch, we'd be happy to help.
Thank you. I don't think we have more questions to ask. So, well, I think this is all for today. I may ask Mr. Steve if you have anything to add, or if you have any point to add for closing this session, please.
I'd just like to thank you all for attending today. It's been a marvelous opportunity for us to showcase our competition model. And as Cherie has repeatedly said, we look forward to one of you or more of you hosting one of our tournaments in the near future. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, please be noted that there will be one more session for virtual rugby on 10th December. So registration is already open. So visit the registration page and book your seat. Don't be late. Okay. Okay. I wish you all the best. Stay safe and healthy until we see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Have a nice day.